Another crowd flurried around Jesus. Their desperate cries for more words of wisdom and acts of healing were deafening. His popularity had stretched to the furthest reaches of Judea and Samaria. Not a traveler passed through the land without hearing his name. As Jesus often did, he walked beside the sea. He enjoyed the way the water and wind amplified his voice for all to hear. And if need be, he could make a quick escape onto a boat if things got out of hand. Jesus was tending to the crowd, teaching them the ways of the kingdom. A faint yell could be heard from the sea of faces. "Jesus!" he yelled. His head was barely poking out of the vast crowd. However, Jesus knew his voice. It was the voice of Jairus, one of the synagogue rulers. Jesus gestured for him to be let through. Jairus fell at his feet, sobbing. It was odd for the people to see a man of such power groveling before anybody. This showed Jesus' true influence. Jairus looked up at Jesus and said, "Please, Lord, my daughter, my little girl, is sick to the point of death." There is no pain like a parent in fear of losing a child. Jesus could feel its palpable presence in Jairus. "Say no more," Jesus said. "Lead on, and I will go to your daughter." So Jesus got down from the boat where he was sitting and stepped into the crowd. They were violently seeking his attention. His fame had caused a great deal of chaos wherever he went. The crowd grabbed at him and shoved him in every direction. His disciples took it upon themselves to make a way for Jesus and Jairus to get through, but it was an exhausting task. As Jesus made his way through the forceful crowd, a small and quiet presence followed him. Her hand was small and shaking. Her once beautifully lush face was gray and fading. A woman followed closely behind Jesus, reaching out to touch him. Her entire body trembled as blood slowly dripped down her inner thighs. She had had a discharge of blood for over 12 years. The seeping blood from her lower half caused a great deal of pain and sapped much energy from her. Yet worst of all, it made her unclean in Jewish tradition. She was unable to enter the synagogues or temples. She was unable to go to feasts and celebrations. She was unable to marry. Her last penny was spent on physicians. They could not help her. She was hopeless and alone, until she heard about the man named Jesus. She could see Jesus, so close yet so far. He was only a few feet away, but the violent crowd was continually tugging or tossing her to the ground. She reached for him and missed. She tried to call out his name, but the people were too loud. She got up to her feet and tried to run towards him, but someone pulled her back, and her face fell into the stony ground. She thought of giving up and just remaining on the ground. She would be trampled, and her miserable life would be ended. "No," she thought to herself. "If I could just touch his garments, I know I will be healed." She lifted herself up and crawled towards Jesus. In one last effort, she threw herself towards him and barely touched the hem of his garment. She fell to her knees. Jesus stopped and turned around. "Who touched me?" he asked his disciples. They laughed. At first they thought he was joking. "Are you serious?" they asked him. "Thousands of people are grabbing at you, and you ask, 'Who touched me?'" Jesus shook his head. "No," he clarified. "This was different." Jesus looked around and saw the woman kneeling on the floor, being rammed in the head by random people in the crowd. Jesus knelt down and touched her shoulders. "My daughter, your faith has made you well. Go and be free," Jesus said with a warm smile. Tears streamed down the woman's face. She was speechless. No words could quite thank Jesus properly, so she bowed to him and left. "Please, Lord, we will be too late," Jairus begged. Jesus stood to his feet and continued to walk forward. As they made their way out of the main streets, the crowd began to settle. Only a few people remained: Jesus, Jairus, and the 12 disciples. They approached the home, and a member of Jairus' family ran to them. His face was grim. Dried tears and dirt caked his face. "She's gone," he whispered to Jairus. "Do not trouble the teacher any further." Jesus overheard the 2 men whispering. He interrupted them and said, "It is not so," he said. "Do not be afraid. Believe in me and watch." Jesus gestured for Peter, James, and John to come with him into the house. In a small courtyard, many people were wailing and weeping on the floor. The halls echoed with tears and mourning. It was the saddest thing Peter, James, or John had ever witnessed. It was clear that the little girl meant a great deal to them. Jesus walked up to the women weeping and asked, "Why is everyone making such a commotion? The child is only sleeping." The woman scoffed at him. His words seemed insensitive and almost evil. However, behind Jesus' questions were a promise. He took Jairus, his wife, and the 3 men with him upstairs. They entered the door, and there, lying on the bed, was the girl's lifeless body. She could not have been more than 12. Her once rosy cheeks were white. Jesus walked over to her body slowly and knelt by the side of her bed. He held her little hand in his. Jesus' eyes watered as he held the little girl. Death was never God's intention. He is the author of life. Jesus kissed the little girl's hand and said, "Talitha Kumi," which means, "Little girl, arise." The girl's chest began to rise steadily up and down. Color was slowly returning to her face. Jesus smiled as her beautiful brown eyes opened. She sat up, stretched, and yawned as if she had awoken from a long nap. Jesus laughed with joy as the others in the room awed in amazement. The 2 parents rushed to their daughter's side, kissing her and hugging her. Jairus wiped tears from his eyes and looked up at Jesus with a face of gratitude. Jesus, Peter, James, and John left the room so the family could be together. As he left, he turned to one of the servants and asked for her to bring the little girl some food.